Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Lighting the Future with Katana. My name is Elise, and I am here to give a quick Foundry update and introduce Nick Boughen, co-founder and director of education at CG Masters, along with my colleagues, Brian Fukushima and Kaylin Arnold. Today, Nick will be discussing the reasons CG Masters decided to include Katana in their curriculum, the benefits of Katana in production, and how your students will benefit from learning it. Brian, a creative specialist at Foundry, will also be joining the conversation and hosting the question and answer session during the last half of the webinar. Also, Kaylin, our Education Business Development Manager, is here to talk about Foundry's educational resources. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, please add them into the questions tab. Also, there are a couple of questions for you to answer in the poll section, so please be sure to check those out. Foundry is now 1 month into our virtual events series, and we are continuing to plan 6 virtual events each month. The virtual events are a mix of webinars, skill-ups, and sessions. Webinars are technical deep dives, skill-ups are focused on career advancement, and the sessions are conversations with leading industry professionals. Our upcoming webinar schedule includes Katana and Pixar's RenderMan, Rendering Onward and Beyond, which will air on May 19th, and a CG Supervisor Roundtable session on May 28th. To register for these events, you can go to foundry.com/events or to our Livestorm page, which is linked below. On Livestorm, you'll also be able to watch our past webinars on demand, which includes a step-by-step student's guide to getting started with Katana, as well as Katana Skill Up. If you have any feedback on our virtual events, we would love to hear it, so please feel free to reach out to virtual.events@foundry.com. And finally, check out Foundry's Insight Hub on our website, where you can find product updates, case studies, and articles on industry trends. You can also subscribe to the Insights Hub quarterly newsletter to stay up to date. And also, if you're on social media, stay connected with Foundry and follow us using the handle @FoundryTeam. Just want to say thank you for everybody for joining us today, whether this is your first time joining us for a virtual event or if you're back for seconds. We're happy that you're staying connected with the Foundry community, and we hope that you all are staying safe and creative and connected during this time. And with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Nick.
Good morning. First of all, I want to say it's pretty cool to see a bunch of familiar names on the list. So I see a bunch of industry colleagues and graduates and other people I have known through industry throughout the years, so welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about why our school decided to adopt Katana in our education curriculum. Once I'm through, it'll probably be pretty obvious, and you'll probably be asking yourself, if your school does not already have this tool, why not? So to begin with, I want to go into a little bit of history. I should first introduce myself and explain the backstory. So I trained as a theatrical scenic and lighting designer in the 80s, and I worked full-time in theatrical production until the late 90s as a stage production facilities manager. During my years as a scenic and lighting designer, I actually started using 3D to do set designs because I realized it gave me the opportunity for the first time in history to be a designer who could show a director a completed set and lighting design before ever entering the theater. And that was really exciting to me. When visual effects then later came to Vancouver, and they were looking for anybody who knew any 3D whatsoever, became kind of an obvious jump for me to go from theater, where there's a lot of passion but no money, to a career in film and TV visual effects. So all my design background, my lighting design and lighting theory background really came into play there. I started working freelance in 1997. I worked on my first TV movie in 1999 and became a lighting and match move supervisor in 2001, a CG supervisor in 2004, and a VFX supervisor, CG Sup in 2002, and a VFX supervisor in 2004. Now this is where things get interesting, because I started building my own production teams. Over the course of my career in visual effects, I Worked on 28 films, 4 television series, and over 200 commercials. Building production teams, though, was an interesting change for me because there was a lot of frustration hiring juniors for the teams. And there just weren't enough senior and intermediate people to fill the roles, and furthermore, budgets wouldn't support a crew entirely made out of seniors and intermediates. You need junior artists in your ranks, and you need to grow them and train them and build your systems. And one of the biggest problems we faced was finding decent lighting artists. So we quickly discovered that the concept in visual effects of what lighting is as simple as, well, what's so hard about that? You put a light in the scene and you turn it on and you point it at what you want lit. That's how you light, right? And that's obviously not, that's pretty much the same as if you said a brain surgeon, well, you just get a scalpel and you cut open the head and you like slice some stuff, right? Same idea. Lighting involves an understanding of optics and physics, and there's a lot of theoretical knowledge necessary to light properly, especially if we're trying to get a photorealistic result. So I started teaching, so I took my lighting design theory that I had learned and my experience in visual effects, and I went and started teaching at local schools. And my purpose was simply to create better lighting artists who I could hire into my own teams. That went on for almost a decade, and it wasn't going quickly enough, so I decided we needed to reach more people. So we started CD Masters online training in 2010 to provide streaming training videos to get, once again, better lighting artists. In 2012, the opportunity arose to expand to a physical campus, which we did, and we've been open since then. And part of our mandate of the school, and this is driven by these experiences, a major part of our mandate is to generate great lighting artists and TDs who are well-trained in theory, best practices, and technology. So you can see the philosophy behind where we're coming from, and you can probably already see that pointing towards Katana. So part of the recipe for our success has been that we have always had a willingness and ability to stay ahead of the technology curve. So rather than waiting to hear from industry, oh, we've been using this for years and now we need more people for it, and then developing a curriculum and then starting to train in, and then maybe 2 years later starting to produce people, we're on top of the production technology that's coming out today. So right now we're looking at adopting USD heavily into our pipeline, and that's not really all the way out there, but it's going to be. So when Katana was originally created, we were like, I emailed Kayla and I'm like, can we get Katana? She's like, no, it's not available for schools. It takes a team to go into the studio, and that all has to be set up and integrated into the pipeline, all that stuff. And this conversation went on for years, and finally, well, let's see, I think I have a next slide here. Yeah, so Katana was originally developed by Sony. It was released to industry in 2011, but so our school started in 2012. It was one of the first tools we looked at, but we couldn't get it. It finally became available to schools 7 years later in 2018. So we brought it in, installed it, got it running, and we had it in part of our production pipeline by 2019. Katana is the fastest growing industry product. Fastest growing Foundry product right now, and what that means is that the industry needs TDs, lighting TDs who are trained in Katana. So the reasons for adoption are pretty straightforward. In addition to that, there's a good reason why industry has been adopting this tool at a very fast pace. So what appeals is that everything is referenced. The interface is a node-based interface. If you're familiar with Nuke and other node-based software, you probably understand the value of a procedural workflow. Procedures are what make us efficient, and they keep studios financially healthy. So as production managers, we should be really interested in tools that convert our workflows to procedural. And therefore, as educators, we should be interested in training in those tools. So one of the great things we love about Katana is that everything is referenced. So some applications contain their scene elements, such as geometry, which can make scenes really, really heavy, slow, and difficult to edit. But when everything is referenced, switching out assets is simple. We can update instantly many different scene files with a single change. And if all scene files are using the same reference asset, we know that all scenes contain the latest approved version. And as those of us from industry know, version control is really important. We run into a lot of trouble when we have a lot of different versions of the same asset floating around in different scenes. And everything referenced really helps us avoid that. So the interface being node-based is a big deal. It makes it easy to figure out what you've done so you can see the flow of your work. It makes it easy to diagnose problems because you can select whole groups of nodes and disable them. It makes it really easy to branch off and do experiments in different versions. So if you're doing your breakouts for your render passes, super, super simple with the node-based system. Nodes make everything easier. And since nodes are procedures, and since procedures are speed, and speed equals on time and on budget delivery, it's kind of a no-brainer that we should be using procedural node-based workflows wherever possible. So what is the actual experience like? Well, there's good and bad, of course. The highly procedural design permits massive collaboration and efficiency. So specifically, there's something called collection expression language, which is just a little scripting language inside Katana. It allows you to instantly access all types of anything and make a change to them. So if you have massive data sets, you can make very quick changes with a really, really simple little line of code. For example, we just completed a project at the school. We remade, I don't know how many people here will remember, a 1970s TV series called Space 1999. And we just remade the opening sequence. And in a couple of shots, we have these lighting pylons on the moon, and there's like 75 of them. And if we need to make a change, or if we want to apply a shader or change a shader, in the old days, we would be grabbing all those elements and changing them one by one, or trying to multi-select them and change them. With CEL, we can make a change with a line of code. So it's super efficient for large or massive data sets. One of my favorite things about Katana is that it lets us create tools as what Katana calls macros. And all a macro is just a kind of a node container filled with a bunch of other nodes. So you can create any node network, contain it inside a macro, and then distribute it to everybody instantly. So if you drop it in a specific directory and everybody's environment variables are pointing to that directory, which is very easy to set up, and I create and save a macro, for example, a turntable tool or a lighting rig, and I put it in a directory, the person next to me can click tab and get that node and drop it into their scene file. It's so slick, it's unbelievable. So this is one really simple example of how this node-based workflow and the ability to save these nodes and distribute them makes the workflow super fast. Katana connects to a bunch of popular renderers. It comes shipped with 3D Light, which is a really beautiful, really artist-friendly and modern renderer. So it's a path tracer, so very modern technology there. And the software developers of 3D Light are great with their support as well. So we used 3D Light on our first project. If you're familiar with node-based workflows already, it feels familiar. And that's a real benefit. Another one of my favorite things is look files. So what a look file is you can take, well, what they're commonly used for is shaders. So we build shaders, we add our textures, we develop a look for an asset, and then we can save that look as a look file. But in fact, look files can be used to save any nodes. So you can save lighting rigs, you can save, well, basically any set of nodes into a look file, but most commonly, and we use them most commonly for shaders. And the beauty is that the look file is really a baked document. So one of the things that's really important in a really good production pipeline is what we call clean interdepartmental handoff. So, for example, when we hand animation to lighting, we really don't want to hand them a rig that can be accidentally tweaked or changed. So we bake out our animation into, for example, an Alembic format or an FBX format or something. So when the lighting department gets it, they don't have any, there's no controls, there's no way they can change the animation. But there really hasn't been much of a way to do that for lighting, and the look file actually does that for us. It lets us publish a shader or basically anything, and the person at the other end has no controls to change it. And what this does is it guarantees that the approved published version is the version that comes out of the next department. There's so many, I mean, the pipeline is really complex, and one of the biggest complexities in the pipeline is human error. People make mistakes all the time. It's very easy to accidentally tweak something if you have the controls to do it, and then come out the other end and realize that, oh my God, I actually moved the camera, and now the entire render does not line up with the approved animation. So if we send that as a baked animation file, a baked camera, then it can't be changed. And it's really desirable to have that in every department, and that's what I really like about the look files out of Katana. So I explained how it's really easy to make tools. So drop down a bunch of nodes, create a tool that's working for you, contain it, and publish it as a macro. Once you get a bunch of your custom tools set up, so you can set up tools to have your studio run the way you want, then using those tools makes your workflow really, really fast. So this is the main benefit of the procedural workflow out of Katana, is that once you have your tools set up, your production is just going to go blisteringly fast, and that just makes for efficiencies, which reduces budget, which increases the bottom line, which keeps the studio healthy. And then, of course, probably the linchpin here is that the Foundry support is amazing. So when we decided to adopt Katana, they assigned Brian as my service support specialist, and he was like practically living in my email for a few days while I got everything set up and working. I got my environment variables figured out, and I set it up myself. I'm not an IT guy. I mean, I've kind of learned some IT by osmosis by having school, but it was actually fairly straightforward to get it set up. It does take a little bit of technical knowledge, and that kind of takes us to the next slide, which is what we call the bad. And the bad is, well, you don't just install it and it runs. Okay, it takes a little bit of understanding about how to create environment variables. The Foundry has a really good document about how to create what we call a startup batch file that includes where your renderer is installed and what renderer you want to use, and a few other path locations. For example, if you want to distribute macros, so you have to set up a few things, but it comes with a pre-made startup batch file that it's really well documented. It's actually quite easy to edit to get it to work for yourself. Once you understand it, oh, somebody changed my thing. Hey, stop it. So it's a little bit of work to get it up and running. So it's not for the person who wants to just install it and run it. But to me, the little bit of effort that it takes to get Katana up and running is completely worth it. Using the tool, it's a very, very technical tool. So yes, lighting artists can use it to create great artistic pictures, but they can also do that in any software. That's not what Katana is about. What Katana is about creating efficiencies for the studio. And because of that, it comes with a lot of technical ability that requires some technical knowledge. So the one thing that we've talked about at our end is that we kind of wish it came with a few more packaged tools. There's arguments against that. For example, like, one of the things I'm always thinking is, well, why doesn't it come just with a turntable tool built in, with a couple of lights and a turntable all set up, and you just attach your geometry and render it? And the argument is, well, yeah, but different studios have different standards for what their turntable should be like and how long it should be and how many times it should rotate. So every turntable tool is different. So there's that argument. But there's also the argument of, yeah, but you could just have a turntable tool instantly. So, that's something that Foundry and I go back and forth with and discuss from time to time. But from our end, we think it would be a little bit easier to get started with if it came with a few more prepackaged it does come with some prepackaged example files that you can look at and learn from. But if it came with I mean, this is just my opinion, you guys, so you guys can give me a hard time about this later. I just think it would be nice if it came with a couple of things that would get people productive right away. When I originally wrote this, it says not super user-friendly. That was when I was first learning Katana. I understand why I wrote this at the time, and it's because Katana is different. It's not hard. It's just a different way of thinking about doing your work. But if you're unfamiliar with Node workflow, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to wrap your head around it. On the other hand, it's pretty much a requirement if you're going to be a professional these days to be pretty familiar with Node-based workflow. The documentation when I originally wrote this was a little bit underwhelming, but I see that they've added a whole bunch of videos. We've also created a bunch of free training videos for getting started with Katana. And one of the things I did when I was originally learning Katana early last year was when I would hit a snag, something was a little bit obscure to me, and then I would eventually figure it out, is I would make a little 5-minute video going, okay, here's how you do this, and here's why it's this way. So I made a whole ton of little 5-minute videos, and we put them on so VFX School is the website that we use to distribute little training videos to our students. It's free for everybody though. So anybody can go on there and have a look through. So if you're interested in getting started in Katana, you can have a look at some of the little getting started videos that I created. And also the Foundry has a whole bunch of them on their website as well. To get a lot out of Katana, I think it's almost a requirement to know Python. That said, it's my opinion that any professional CG or visual effects artist should know Python because it'll enable them to automate boring, repetitive tasks and eliminate human error a lot. So that's just my opinion. And I encourage all my students to learn Python. We offer it to them at our school. Lua is another scripting language for advanced use, but to be really effective in Katana, you have to learn the collection expressions language. So it's just a little scripting language, and it's actually very simple little scripting language. A few examples, and you kind of start wrapping your head around the syntax and how it works and how it does what it does. So our students, without being taught, picked up and used CEL within the first month of this past project, and they got really, really good at it without instruction. So that was pretty good. So I've already talked about some of the awesome stuff. So Foundry assigns a specialist to get you set up. At least they did for me. I'm assuming they would for anybody who wanted to get set up. Their documentation is always improving and growing. Their team is super committed to making Katana artist friendly. So, in the course of learning Katana and bringing it into our pipeline, and then of course transferring that knowledge to the students, we discovered lots of little things that weren't super obvious or friendly or were a little bit obscure. And the Foundry team has always been very, very open to, making tweaks and changes that make things a little bit easier for artists. In this couple of versions ago, they added a new node-based material network, which is really great. I love building node-based shaders. Like I said, if you're familiar with nodes, you'll understand why that is. The raw power of proceduralism. So I can't say enough about proceduralism. Procedures make everything work better, faster, and less expensively. They permit artists to go home and sleep at night and have a family and a life. And they permit studios to, have a profit margin. So, I've been doing this for a long time. I refer to myself as the jaded old CG guy. And Katana is the first time in a long time that I've actually been excited about a tool. So for me, that actually says something. I can be pretty cynical about these tools. So Our final word would be, if you want your training to be current, you should be adopting Katana, and everybody will benefit from that. The students will benefit, the industry will benefit, and as trainers for industry, which is what we are, that should be our goal. So I say thank you, and that's my spiel. So I guess over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Nick. Just to remind everyone that if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the questions tab. I was actually just responding to one right now, Nick, if you wanted to jump into that with me.
Sure.
The question came in as, scrolling everywhere. Beside Python, which language would you prefer us to learn as immediate steps? And my thought on this is never one specific language is, you go learn Python or you go learn Cell or Lua. It's more learning the basics of computer science, learning what a variable is, learning how a loop iterates, right? These core fundamentals I find transcend every language. And once you learn those core fundamentals, that's when you can start to just go to any language and apply those fundamentals. What do you think, Nick?
Oh, geez. Sorry, my mic was off. So the question sounds to me like it's coming from somebody who actually wants to get something done. And while I agree it's super important to understand theory is what gives us the real technical strength that really helps us transcend kind of basic workflow. If you want to get something done, you need to just start learning Python. And the reason I say that is because all of the 2D and 3D applications that we use support Python. So we can write scripts inside our tools to speed us up. And learning Python, it is only one way of doing things, for sure. But it is, it's a way to get things done in your software right now. And you will learn the basic fundamentals Brian was talking about only from the Python point of view, though. My personal experience was I learned HBasic and then BASIC first, and then some C++ and then Python. My experience was learning how to do something once in a software that actually gave me results was really, really useful. And then learning other softwares gave me the broader point of view. So if you were on a course of wanting to learn programming, so software engineering, starting with theory is really important. If you're starting from the point of view of just wanting to get something done, I would say just get Python for Dummies. It's very user-friendly, heavily supported, is the most used programming language in the world today, and all of 3D applications support it. And there's huge support communities. So one of my favorite places to go is Stack Overflow. When I have a question of why doesn't my fill in the blank work, there's already been 50 people who've discussed this. So there's tons of online support for learning that. And there's tons of examples. So I don't know, does that answer the question?
I think it's a great answer to the question. I agree with you for the most part. It really depends on where you're coming from.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying the theory is not important. That's not what I'm saying.
No, but it really, you're right. It's from the production standpoint, it really depends on what your end goals are, right? Is because if you want someone to do something quite simple, right? You want them to change all the names in something. That should be a 5-minute script for inexperienced TD. However, you have someone going in there being like, no, I'm going to engineer this massive thing. It's going to take 4 weeks, blah, blah,
for
blah,
sure.
Blah. You're like, no, I don't want you to spend your time on that. I want something quick and dirty. Let's do it.
Yep.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. I'm just going to go by how many votes they have.
Okay.
There's one here. Do you have any resources you would recommend for learning traditional lighting theory, especially with integration for Katana? If we are talking pure traditional lighting theory, I actually like Itten's The Art of Color. It's from like the 1950s, but it really goes into how color actually works. For Katana specific, we're going to be talking about this at the end, and we'll provide some links, but I believe it's learn.foundry.com. We've got a lot of great resources on there, along with, I believe, Nick, you have some in your from vfxschool.com as well that we've posted a link in the chat.
Yeah. Additionally to that, I would say spend some time thinking about the statement I'm about to make. Everything you can see is either a light source or is reflective. Once you wrap your head around that simple fact, you'll understand both materials and light much, much better.
I completely agree, because technically you can't see a black hole.
Well, the problem is that most people think a mirror is reflective and a piece of paper is not, and that's false.
That is very false. I think the only true thing that's not reflective is literally maybe a light source or a black hole.
Yeah.
At which point in time, I'd love to see a picture of a black hole. But I think
I actually bet a light source is reflective. It's just that you can't see it because it's overexposed.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I guess the amount of reflection that you would see return to it, even if it was at the correct exposure level, would be hard to measure. You would need some very precise.
Yeah. Well, you can see a tungsten filament when it's turned off, right?
Sorry?
You can see a tungsten filament when it's turned off.
Yeah, but I assume that's due to residual effects of it.
Anyway.
But that's anyway. Sorry,
we waxed theoretical.
The actual question at hand here.
Actual questions.
I hope that answered the question. Oh, sorry, I forgot to click the live answer button. So the next question comes in from Mario. Would you recommend learning Katana as an individual artist? How is it improves on look deving in Maya? I personally, I've used Katana since like 2013. I used it for 3 years, and then I had to go back to Maya, and I was just like banging my head on the desk. Maya has tabs everywhere. Your information is scattered all over the place. You don't really necessarily know where you've actually done any bit of information. And the procedural nature of Maya makes it very hard to start to reuse and automate workflows. One of my personal favorite things about Katana is that you only, or anyone in your studio, only has to ever do anything once. After that, as Nick was talking about earlier, you wrap it into a tool, you publish it really simply with a macro. I believe it's like 2 buttons to get it going. And then everyone has access to this powerful new feature that you've implemented. And for me personally, there's a lot of times when even like Nick would have questions and I would have to go back and look at what I had previously done because I don't know it off the top of my head because I've only done it once. And now I just reuse that same thing over and over again. And I think for me, those are the immediate benefits for look deving, specifically when transitioning from Maya to Katana.
Yeah, I have to do that all the time too. Now I'm going back looking at the tools. I want to make a new tool and I'm like, how did we do that? And I have to actually go back and look at how we did it. Yeah, that's super true. I would say one of the benefits of learning it as an individual artist is that it's also going to make you more hireable at larger studios.
I would definitely agree. I think the client base of who's using Katana right now, it seems like it's the who's who of the kind of top tier companies, with a couple of exceptions in there that are still on usually proprietary software. The next question comes from Nimisha. Sorry, I'm butchering that name. I'm really sorry. I do texture and look dev. I am learning Python, have done it earlier also, but I don't know how can I use it in texture and look dev pipeline and then lose touch with the language. Please advise how can I start using it? Do you want to go, Nick?
Yeah, I have an example. So what scripts coding is good for, the main things are good for is reducing human error and relieving humans of simple repetitive tasks. So for example, let's say you're rendering out of RenderMan, and all of your texture maps need to be converted from whatever they are, TIFFs or PNGs or EXRs or whatever you've generated them at, into .tex files. Well, you could do that manually, or you could develop yourself a script that simply sees all of the, because RenderMan comes with a conversion tool. It's just a command line tool. And you could very quickly write a very simple script of just a few lines that would automatically take all the files in a selected directory, make a new directory within it called TEX, copy all the files into TEX and convert them into TX files. And that would save you, quite a bit of time. Like, let's say, on a given asset, you can easily have 20 or 30 texture maps. And if you have to convert those manually one by one, that's going to take you a little while. It's going to take you half an hour. So if you take a couple of hours to write a script, you've saved, you're broken even after the first time you've converted four assets into textures. And after that, you're just saving half an hour on every single asset. And that's a tool that you could give to the team. Now everybody saves half an hour converting their textures on every asset. So one simple script can really make a big difference.
And when you start to think about how cost benefit that is to a production, right?
Yep.
If that took one of your TDs an hour and you're getting an hour a day total back from your artist, that's over the course of the year, you're earning like 200 free days.
Yeah, I'll actually give a personal example of how Python helped me. So one of the things I do, since we work on every term, we do a large group project over the course of the whole term. And it's usually a piece that's about 2 minutes long. And it's either a visual effects or an animation piece consisting of between 20 and 50 shots. And I edit it. So every time I edit, I have to go and find all the latest versions and compile them. And sometimes I want the latest animation versions. Sometimes I want the latest lighting versions. I might want the latest layout versions, the latest comp versions, whatever. I have to go through all the dailies folder and find all the latest versions. And the first few times I did this, I realized it was taking me about an hour and a half each time just to compile all the latest versions of the QuickTimes that were in dailies. So I wrote myself a little script, and now every time I have to compile, I have a little user interface that permits me to select what department I want. So for example, if I want all the latest animation files of every shot in the sequence, I just select animation and click go, and in about 30 seconds, they're done. Then I grab them and drop them into the edit. So it took me about 2 hours to write the script and get it working properly. And it saves me an hour and a half every single time I do this. I do this 20 or 30 times per term. So that's how knowing a little bit of Python can really make you massively faster.
I totally agree. Because for me personally, my personal story for that is that every time I find myself doing something and I find myself repeating the same task over and over again, I think to myself, if I can put music on, zone out, and do this task with my eyes closed, I can write a script to do this for me.
Yeah.
I can just listen to the music and sit on the couch and then pretend that I was working for 15 minutes. But really, no, it's these types of things that they really help to automate the flow.
Yep.
So let's move on to the next question. Click the button. Is the whole industry heading towards only programming language in the future? I'm going to guess this means heading towards only one programming language. If so, then it seems, I don't think it's going to be one programming language per se for the entire thing, as different languages hold different benefits.
Yeah, you could never use Python, for example, to write renderers. It's just not fast enough. Here's the deal. So Python, so there's two main kinds of ways of running a program, and one is using a compiler and one's using an interpreter. And what a compiler does is it takes the program and crushes it down into machine language so that it's actually really efficient. So just binary or hexadecimal or whatever machine language is. And then when it runs it, it's super fast. Whereas Python, which is written in a human readable language, gets executed by something called an interpreter. So it doesn't compile it into machine language. What it does is read a line of human readable, convert that to machine language, and then execute it. And then it goes to the next line of human readable, converts it to machine language, and then execute it. So it's actually way slower than something like C++. So you cannot use it on really intensive software applications. So there's no way there's going to be just one software application or one programming language. There's no way.
And Python is actually slow enough that the expressions inside of Katana, you can start to get a massive bottleneck when using them. That's why we have pre-compiled C++ expressions that you can use, which in, I believe, Katana 3.6 or 7 are going to be expanded drastically, the power behind them. So that is really cool.
Isn't that why you have CEL too? Because it's a really light little scripting language?
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting because CEL is actually Python expandable as well. I believe I've seen the documentation for that, but it's like super easy. It's just like one line of code to register a function to have your own Python call inside of parameter expressions in Cell.
Sweet. I want to know about that.
I will send you some links.
Okay.
And I'll send the links to everyone else here since we're... but yeah, so I hope this answers your question. I didn't even look at the next one. Okay. So this one looks like it has the most votes. How is your adoption / transition to USD going, and how much have you got working in a fully USD setup? So
is that for you or for me?
I think it's for me, but I think
okay.
Let's both answer it. I don't know. So from Foundry side on Katana, as of Katana 3.5, we are actually shipping USD. However, it's not turned on by default. So this goes back to the whole thing you were talking about earlier, Nick, and that Katana is not the easiest to set up out of the box, which is fair. It's also much better than it used to be because before it was almost impossible. And now it actually is possible with a few environment variables. But anyway, so USD ships without a box. I'll provide some links to you guys. And essentially what it does is you just need to turn on a couple of environment variables for our precompiled USD. We also have our own GitHub where we have our own USD source that you can compile against if you want to install your own version of USD for Katana.
Okay, so from my end, we're just still in experimental phases. So we're looking into it. Yeah, USD to me is the future. So everything cool's coming out of those guys. Yes. We got EXR from them. We got what else? EXR, something else, and now USD.
No, it's I find USD such a funny file format because I feel like we just went back to the beginning of just like, things in directory.
Yeah, containers within containers within containers. What I love about USD is the potential that you could write a script, input your assets and file names, create some dependencies, run your script, and automatically generate every scene file for every shot. They're just empty and waiting for assets.
Yep.
That's super cool.
USD to me, it excites me, especially because it goes more than that. It transcends a lot of different platforms, right? If you consider, say, CAD languages and what it can do for the archivist community, compiling from, it can't obviously compile from, say, NURBS to polys, but when you consider how it can handle data sets, large data sets, and transition that, it starts to create this nice bridge for everyone in cross-industry 3D applications to start working. Here it is. Okay. Go over here. How is Katana better than Arnold in LookDev?
That's apples and oranges, kind of.
Yes. So this is actually a common misconception that I think a lot of people have is that Katana is not a render engine. Katana is a data aggregator. So Katana really handles how the user deals with information that then gets passed to the render engine such as Arnold or RenderMan or 3Delight.
Is Arnold one of the renders that Katana plugs into?
Oh, yeah. Sony, remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Duh. That's true.
But yeah, so I think Arnold has the second largest market share for render engines in Katana, with RenderMan taking the lion's share right now.
Yeah, I think the correct way to phrase the question would be: is Katana with Arnold better than Maya with Arnold, or 3ds Max with Arnold, or something else with Arnold? Right.
Yep, and I'd say that's one of the biggest tests that a lot of studios like to do, is straight up apples to apples test of, say they come from, V-Ray or 3-to-Light, RenderMan, etc. They want to do a straight up Maya V-Ray test versus, say, a Katana V-Ray or Maya.
Absolutely, that's the right way to go.
And the other thing to note about this in general is every render engine is written differently for every DCC. So your results really are going to vary between render engines. So what might be good in one DCC is not going to be as good in the other DCC. Looking for the next question. Okay, I think this one came first. Will totally AI-generated content replace traditional 3D assets in the near future? I don't think so.
Neither do I.
Clients want what clients want, and a machine can't guess.
Art direct.
Yeah. Not yet, at least. And it's, in order to train that machine learning model, is going to take years of a machine basically being, told that, this, and then it's only specific for one specific person's art direction.
Yeah. Do you guys know that AI is actually really stupid? It's not Skynet, right? AI tries every possible combination and then finds one that works. So it's really, really dumb in its implementation, and then is looking for a successful model. So AI doesn't make decisions, basically.
Well, it depends on how the machine learning language, or how the machine learning algorithm is written, because there's a couple of different styles that you can do it in. But for the most part, it just boils down to probability theory. But I feel like,
yeah.
Once again, delving into another tangent.
Yeah, that's definitely a big discussion and tangent.
Oh yeah. So the next question coming in. I've read in the Katana documentation that Python support is getting deprecated. How a single user or studio is going to handle this change? So that is not true, and please link me to that documentation. There are certain APIs that are being deprecated. Specifically, the asset API will be deprecated because we've seen significant bottlenecks in almost everyone's pipeline, or anyone. As pipelines expand, we've started to see more and more bottlenecks from the Python portion of the asset API, as that is actually querying your pipeline. So as Nick was alluding to earlier, how Python's actually running is going to be really, really slow as it goes in this kind of scan line procedure of line, 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 whereas our C++ version of it is going to be able to just rip through the queries, and not have your user sitting around looking at a little circle spinning around in circles.
Thank you for that answer. I upvoted this question too because I read it and went, what? That can't be right.
Yeah. So I'll definitely have a word and try to sort that out. But if you can send that to us and we can have another look at that, that would be great, because we are definitely not deprecating Python at this point in time. And I would be worried if we were. Let's see. I clicked on the wrong one because the question is updated, but since it's in front of us, let's go for it. Katana is designed only for 3D lighting workflows, or does it allow to integrate 3D with real shot footage? What about color spaces? So Katana is designed specifically for 3D lighting and look dev. It does very well in the visual effects space, so when you're matching to a plate. However, it does equally well, if not better, in the animation space, as that is what it was originally designed to do. As far as color workflows go, we do support a full range of color workflows through the config. It's not the easiest to set up, and this goes once again back to what Nick was saying earlier, is that there's some things in there that you just go, man, it's not user friendly, and this is one of them. And it is definitely on our radar for things that we want to improve. And I think it's feedback like this that helps allow us to determine what is the immediate need of how to use our resources to get the best out to our customer base in the most timely fashion.
I'd say that across different applications, color space is one thing that could use an industry standard.
Kind of has one, but not really. It's like,
well, not everybody in industry agrees with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we all. So we've used Katana for both animation and visual effects very successfully. I don't see whether there would be any issues with either. But definitely your comp supervisor needs to keep an eye on color space coming in and out of lighting and in and out of comp naturally.
All right. Let's go with, is there a reason that Katana and Mari cannot be merged for faster texture and look dev development workflow? Would it be too heavy? And I'm kind of chuckling because I would love this personally as a look dev GD who comes from lighting, look dev, moved through the ranks, understands, like, kind of got trained in the entire process of, model, texture, light, look dev workflow. Like, to me, it makes so much sense to do. Unfortunately, I can't really speak too much about it and the internal workings of Foundry's thoughts behind that at this point in time, but I would highly recommend, as I saw like how quickly this got the votes, if you guys really want this, poke us. Keep poking us and tell us that this is what you want, because this is how we determine a lot of things that are where our development cycles tend to go, is through feedback from our customer base.
This is a really important topic, and it's one of the things that we talk to our students a lot about, because I've worked with, hundreds of artists over the years, and a good proportion of them use their tools as they are and kind of complain about them. Don't get involved in the communities, don't go on the forums, and don't say what it is they actually need. And as professionals, we should be involved in the development of our tools. And as somebody who's been involved with a lot of developers over my entire career, I can tell you that these software developers want to hear from you, and they want to hear what you need. And when they have a bunch of people saying, what would really make our job better, and they hear the same thing from a lot of people, they look at that. So I strongly encourage anybody who's unhappy with their tool in any way to speak up and bug your software developers about it.
And I can safely say this, that if you guys bug us, you will have my support on this one. Yep. I would use that tool like no other.
That's absolutely true.
So it looks like we're running short on time right now. We might have time for one more quick question. Let's see, this one has the most votes, and I think it's a me question, so I'll just run through this really quick. You mentioned RenderMan has the largest share of the industry, with Arnold second. Might I ask where you get these stats and which others are on the list? So right now there are currently 5 public render engines available: RenderMan, Arnold, Redshift, 3Delight, and V-Ray. These stats are actually internal to us based off of our client base and who is using what render engine. But we find that the final 3 of 3Delight, Redshift, and V-Ray have a much smaller client share, along with proprietary render engines. Of course, I'd guess that they probably grab about like 5 to 10% of the total share of render engines for Katana. With that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Kaylin to let you guys know a little bit more about our educational offerings and where you can learn more about Katana and how to get started with it.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you again to everyone for attending the webinar. We wanted to highlight some additional resources on our website, which you'll see here. If you click on the Education tab, you'll find details on our first year free program, which is open to all students who are new Foundry customers. Below that, you'll find some extra details on our other student and graduate licensing options, as well as details on our classroom and faculty license. Below that, you'll find some FAQs on our educational licenses, what's included in the licenses, some extra training videos and case studies from some of our educational partners, including, I believe, one from Nick. And then if you click on the Learn tab up at the top and go to the Katana section, see that there, You'll find some of our Katana webinar series, which was hosted by Jordan Thistlewood, as well as our Katana 3.1 Getting Started series and Katana Core Concepts series. Both of these training series include a downloadable asset to go along with the videos. If you have any questions about the webinar today, our Katana educational licenses, or looking for some additional help getting started with teaching Katana, please email us at education@foundry.com and we'll be happy to help. Thank you all again.